Hello, and thanks so much for joining us today. I'm Carol Jenkins. The program is Black America, and today we're so honored to have Rashad Robinson, who heads up colorofchange.org. It's the largest online social justice organization. I don't know, almost 3 million, millions of viewers, of members of his organization across this country. The most powerful digital social justice organization that's ever been created. Rashad, I'm always amazed by your numbers, and thank you so much for being with us here today.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be with you.
So I've been following some of the work that you've been doing, which is really so essential in reaching out to Black America, Brown America, in terms of COVID and the unfair disadvantages that we are suffering. Mm-hmm. You call it a health crisis, a financial crisis, a civil rights crisis, and a humanitarian disaster. Tell us a little bit more about how you're perceiving this, just as we are, moving into the reopening of America. What happens to us now?
Well, the coronavirus doesn't attack communities or people by race, but American society does. And because American society attacks communities and people and individuals by race, we then see the deeper impact of this virus laid over a culture and a society that is deeply unequal, where folks are denied access to healthcare and quality healthcare, then being blamed for not being healthy. You're denied education, and you're blamed for not being educated. And we see this in so many different ways. And so part of what we've been trying to do is translate this awareness to very clear action, giving everyday people something to do that really helps to move the conversation about racial justice forward. And in particular, sort of some of the things that I think are, really exciting about what we're seeing is an unprecedented number of people taking action with us, of people wanting to join and stand up. We're also seeing the pain of the catch-22, people who were called essential workers, now, but were treated and have been treated like anything but essential workers for so long, since the beginning. And so, what we're seeing is a catch-22 in so many of these states reopening, where people are being forced to choose between their jobs and their livelihood and their health. And that up against a backdrop, right, of white armed men showing up in capitals with guns, demanding Black people go back to work. And so all of this requires a level of action, a level of accountability on those in power, a level of accountability on corporations. And that's really what we've been doing through our platform, the Black Response, the blackresponse.org, really trying to build a powerful response to this epidemic that deals not just with the crisis of the virus, but the crisis of virus of bad decisions that preceded this and the virus of bad decisions that have followed.
Yeah, so clearly the fault lines of our society exposed in the most brutal, deadly way. I was just looking at an interview you did with Senator Kamala Harris about all of this, a very, very good, broad-ranging conversation about how we got here. Let's take a listen to a clip of that, and then we'll resume on the other side.
What this pandemic, like any crisis, what it does and what it has done is it has shown a microscope on these disparities that have long existed frankly forever, because of systemic and institutional racism, because of the biases that exist, because of all the things that you and I and all of us know have been structural and longstanding and historic in our country. And they've just been highlighted now because of this pandemic. So on the public health piece, well, Black folks are 20% more likely to have asthma, 40% more likely to have high blood pressure. Black women 3 times more likely to have lupus, which is an autoimmune disease, than white women. You look at it in terms of sickle cell anemia. The sickle cell survivors and patients are very vulnerable and susceptible to respiratory viruses, right? Which of course is what COVID is. So you then look at that, and then you look at the fact that when all of the data is starting to rack up. I mean, I've been talking about the disparities for quite some time, since the pandemic started. As of today, even though we are 13% of the population, Black folks are 13% of the population of the United States, 58% of the deaths from this pandemic.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So I think that what we can be assured of is that she is aware of what has happened here and is asking, or as she says, demanding response, demanding action. What are you demanding? What's the color of change demanding?
Yeah, well, through our platform, we have a kind of policy of a platform of 10 sort of different demands that range from healthcare to what's happening in our prisons and our jails where social distancing is impossible, and really focusing on decarceration. Protection for Black and brown businesses who have not benefited at the same level from the paycheck protection programs that have rolled out because
Is
they
it,
went through
yeah,
big businesses.
yeah,
They went through,
Rashad,
yeah.
one of the figures that I saw is the estimate that 90% of Black businesses did not get their application or were not, or deemed not qualified.
Absolutely, and we dug a little deeper. We did a poll with GSG and in partnership with Unidos US to look at Black and brown businesses and Black and brown workers and to see how they were dealing with this crisis. And one thing that we found beyond the sort of big number of them not getting recovery is that only 12% of the businesses who even requested as little as $20,000 got the full amount. And so, that alone, right, is an example of how in design of a policy, right, there you don't end up with a sort of unfortunate racial outcome. You end up with an unjust. It's not a car accident. The inequality is baked in. And so oftentimes we talk about these things in a passive voice, right? We'll say Black people are less likely to get loans from banks, when in fact, banks are less likely to give loans to Black people. We will sometimes say women are less likely to get hired in tech, when tech companies are less likely to hire women. And part of what we've been trying to do is also change the language, right? Black communities are not vulnerable. Black communities have been exploited, attacked. Vulnerability is sort of a personal trait. I feel vulnerable when, like I see an ex really happy on Facebook. But being vulnerable is when for a community, is that we've been left exposed by a whole set of decisions that now society as a whole is having to deal with. And so, we've created a list of sort of demands. We then built a whole set of campaigns that are really giving everyday people through the Black response the ability to take action,
Go through a few.
Yeah.
Forgive me, I know that there's a lag going on, but before our social distancing conversation, look forward to seeing you in the studio again soon, Rashad. But go through some specific things. I know that the imprisoned population is something that's very high on your list. Ventilators and what's happening to them still in hospitals on your list. Take us through a few of those.
Well, the ventilator question is an important one, whereas we have broken ventilators in a lot of hospitals around the country, especially hospitals that serve Black and brown communities. And the ventilator companies are refusing to allow folks who know how to fix them, using sort of, laws and loopholes that really are designed to protect corporations. And in the middle of a crisis where everyone is having to lean in all different ways and make sacrifices, these big companies are having these machines sitting in hospitals that can't be fixed right now because they are, holding sort of the regulations and the rules against them being fixed. And so we've been pushing companies to release those rules. We've been obviously fighting, as I said before, to deal with the fact that the money from the paycheck protection went through big banks who have traditionally fleeced our communities. And we've got to sort of figure out how to ensure that resources actually get to our main streets in Black communities around the country, so that our barbershops and beauty salons and restaurants are actually saved and we don't lose a generation of Black businesses.
Rashad, I did notice that, and one of the things as we read about this problem is that, some in our community have stepped up in a really huge way. Magic Johnson and Robert Smith, and talk to us a little bit about that. I'm going to go back to the list because you're doing such wide sweeping work that we really need to address. But what about the response of the well-to-do in the Black communities for forcing, I think in the case of Magic Johnson and Robert Smith, they both are giving loans to small Black businesses.
They are both giving loans, and I think that that's incredible. And I want to say that, there's just nothing but a lot of appreciation and respect. But some of the big corporations are not getting loans.
Right.
They're getting bailouts.
Right.
They're getting checks, and this is not the first time, right? The airline industry got loaned out back in 2000, got bailed out back in 2008, and then, proceeded to turn around and buy back their stocks. And we still have all of those extra baggage fees that we're still paying that were supposed to kind of magically go away after our tax dollars save them. And so, yes, Black businesses many of them are starting to get loans in certain places, but many of our businesses simply don't have the capital for loans. We don't have relationships and the history of credit. Many of the businesses were sort of, built off of like mortgaging someone's home or taking sort of a check from someone who may have passed in the family and then putting it behind an idea. And part of the sort of bad decisions that led to this crisis, that led to the crisis of epic proportions that have forced cities to have to close down, and now we turn around and we tell businesses they have to take out loans. Well, actually, the federal government should be responsible for some of the bad decision making that they've had, and as a result, many of these businesses need things like grants.
Right.
And
pure straight grants
are similar to places around the world that we've seen in places like Denmark and elsewhere, where their recovery has been a lot stronger.
So it's not that we'll give you this money and you have to pay it back at some exorbitant rate, or we're going to then take your house. It's a grant, to get back on your feet.
And people might be listening and thinking, wow, well, he's like just trying to hand out free money. So here's the choice that we have here, right? The choice is that we either keep people connected to work or they go on unemployment. So if we keep people connected to work and we invest in saving businesses that are ready to reopen when our economy reopens, our economy will be much stronger down the line. We could also not bail out these businesses, not support small businesses, and people are no longer connected to work. They are on unemployment. And when the economy starts, it's going to take a lot longer for people to actually get off of unemployment. Unemployment will run out. We will not have money that's moving around in between businesses and people, paying workers, paying for services. And so there's actually a very different sort of way, a path forward. Part of what's happening right now, because of some of the decisions that have been made at the federal government, is when big corporations are getting bailed out, we're essentially sort of transferring wealth. We're transferring wealth to those sort of at the bottom of the income and wealth scale, and we're transferring it right up to those at the top.
I know this has been as so many organizations and small businesses, heard about the loan process. Some resisted applying for it because they felt, in small businesses, because they felt, well, I may be okay. And then they saw the millions of dollars that were being handed out to cronies and to those who simply, did not need it. So you've got this huge network of millions of supporters, of members of yours across the country. How exactly do they apply the pressure, and to whom, to get this system fixed? Because those of us who talk about going back to life as it was, many of us don't want to go back there. We want a better future. We want a better system, a new life, one that's fairer and that's just.
Well, that's the aspiration, right? The aspiration is that out of crisis, we can build something new. We can fight for a better tomorrow. And part of what we're asking people to do in terms of joining us in this fight is that we are taking their actions directly to those in power. And so, at the federal level, we have been bringing the voices of our members directly to Speaker Pelosi and Leader Schumer, and members of the Congressional Black Caucus, and members of the Progressive Caucus. Part of this was getting this first piece of legislation, this CARES 2 Act, which is now called the HEROES Act, through Congress. And so part of that, we've been really lobbying and pushing and engaging, bringing sort of helping to contextualize the hundreds of thousands of people that have signed petitions and demanded something new to the to those in power, making the case that these are the people that they're going to need during the election. And then, as the bill gets to the Senate, we're going to have to target vulnerable Republican senators. We're going to have to run digital ads. We're going to have to raise the voices. We're going to have to help ensure that there'll be consequences for standing in the way of an equitable recovery, for siding with corporations over Main Street, for putting communities in harm's way for economic and political benefit. And so that's what we're doing. And then part of the other work we're doing is we're also challenging corporations through this crisis. Those that are sometimes leaving the room, the kind of virtual Zoom room, as we're showing up in the virtual Zoom room on Capitol Hill. And the folks who are on one hand talking about recovery and creating beautiful commercials that make us feel warm and fuzzy inside, while lobbying for all sorts of breaks for themselves at the expense of so many of us. And so part of what we're also doing, for instance, Safeway, as a business, refusing to allow SNAP recipients to use their SNAP benefits to get groceries delivered.
It's so it's so outrageous.
So outrageous, right? These are some of the ways in which, looking at services like TurboTax, which have quit all sorts of hidden fees for people who are trying to access, federal aid in this moment. And doing it in ways that people shouldn't actually have to pay those fees, but fleecing people sort of when they are at their most vulnerable and when they are sort of needing to move as quickly as possible to shore up their own households or their own businesses. These are some of the ways in which we're also ensuring that corporate America recognizes that they are in this boat with us, that they don't get to build huge corporations that drive trucks up against our roads and not actually pay the dividends back in.
Yeah, well, the condition should be if they are getting money, they can't use it to fire their employees and give themselves bonuses and parties, as has happened in the past. A couple of minutes ago, you mentioned voting, and of course, we had the horrible Wisconsin scenario that was just awful. Watching those people stand in line, knowing that some of them were going to contract the virus, and they did, and some died. And some of the poll workers as well were exposed. What about voting? Because that is going to be a crucial exercise that we all have to, go through in order to make our country work.
Yeah, so part of our effort here is through the Black responses, we are calling for and mobilizing around national vote by mail. And we have, it's part of one of the things I've pushed and pressed when I've been meeting with members of Congress and members of the Senate, whether it's sort of in private conversations or whether it's through the public, through public conversations we've had on our platform. Also, what we've been able to do is bring some really interesting and important discussions to our members about this. And so I had Stacey Abrams on the Black Response to really talk about the work that she's doing at Fair Fight and some of the work specifically around vote by mail. And Stacey sort of describes it this way, which I think is really just an excellent way for us to think about it, is that vote by mail is not the only way we want people to vote. We know some people will never vote by mail. We're also seeing some places where vote by mail has been put in place, and it's had some real challenges. For instance, Georgia just passed vote by mail, but they didn't include prepaid stamp. And
Precisely.
so you want people to vote by mail so they don't go outside, but then they have to go outside to get a stamp. And so it's almost like you're putting people in a really bad situation. But Stacey describes it like this. Let's say, you have 15 people and 8 of them vote by mail, right? And so now you've taken some of that. And then let's say you have like another like 2 or 3 that vote early voting and they show up to the polls. So now on election day, you have much fewer people that actually need to show up to the polls, and thereby making the polling place much safer, right? I guess if my math is correct, is like 4 people or 5 people left, right? In my number out of the safer. So that gets us to a much better place.
Right. Now, I wanted, and I don't want to run out of time before we deal with these two things. So many kids are at home, they're out of school. So many of our kids do not have perfect Wi-Fi or any Wi-Fi or any, yeah, any help in their schoolwork. How do we deal with this? And then I want to talk to you about the prison population
Yeah.
of endangered, that uh, inescapable non-social distancing. So
Yeah.
this kids first, what do we do with them?
Well, we have been pushing all around the country through local campaigns, actually partnering with local organizations um, on efforts to push for broadband and to get access to broadband, also access to technology and equipment in homes where kids don't actually have it. And so, this has been a real fight for us. We have fought for years for free and open internet, to close the digital divide, for broadband access in our communities. It's been one of the hallmarks of an organization like ours that was founded with a single email in the aftermath of a crisis. We recognize the power that the internet provides, not as a luxury, but as a utility, as something that is required in the 21st century to not compete, but to survive. And if
Exactly.
this virus has taught us anything, it's that like our ability to access information, whether it's about our health, our education, our potential to work, is at our fingertips if we have access to the internet. And the fact that some communities don't have access is not some sort of mistake. It's not some sort of coincidence. It is by design in a system where where big corporations have been allowed to set the rules around who gets access, and thereby setting the rules around who wins and loses. And that is part of what we have to fight for. There will be some money in this federal legislation for that, but there certainly will not be enough.
Okay, and then the nursing home deaths and the prison deaths, well, the meatpacking industry as one. How do we? I know that you have a prison campaign. Talk
And
to
so
us a little bit about that.
the work around prisons is part of a long-standing work around criminal justice. The United States has 4% of the world's population and 25% of the world's incarcerated population. We already had a mass incarceration prison problem before the coronavirus, and much like so many of the things that this has exposed, this problem, due to neglect, due to all sorts of bad decision making, was here before. And now we're dealing with the fact that in prisons and in jails, social distancing is literally impossible. We, have prisons and jails where you have up to 6 to 8 people inside of some cells. You have people going in and out of jails because of the ways that jails are designed, where most people inside of jails haven't been convicted of anything. They're there oftentimes because they are too poor to afford their bail. And so we are pressuring district attorneys around the country, sheriffs, judges, and governors to do release. And that means that this has to be a local strategy. So if you go on the Black Response, you can go to this platform that we have where we are partnering with local organizations in cities and counties around the country to really push and demand for decarceration of prisons and jails. And we've been winning real victories around decarceration. Part of that platform really includes releasing people who are elderly, releasing people who have less than a year, releasing people who are there because of violent crimes, releasing people who are there because they have they're there because they owe bail.
Right.
I had Julian Castro on the Black Response to really talk about sort of not just the prisons and jails, but the impacts on immigrant detention centers and sort of some of
Exactly.
the ways in which people are being held there for incredibly minor offenses and are being given a death sentence by being inside of these cells. All of these are things that we have to fight and push, because here's the thing. We may think about prisons and jails as those places over there that are out of our view. But every single day, people from our communities are going into those institutions to work, and then they are coming back into our communities to live. And they are tracking the disease in and out as well. And so we've literally created a hot box for these diseases to continue to flourish and stay and continue to impact other communities. The question is do we believe that we have the right to give people inside of prisons and jails a death sentence due to bad public policy, due to bad justice work, due to bad ideas about safety and justice. We can do
Well,
better, and that's
I
part
would,
of the
yeah.
work we're trying to do.
I'd be on the side of saying no. There is no right to do that. It's
No right.
another scandal. I want to make sure that everybody knows the blackresponse.org, where Rashad is doing terrific interviews and really presenting the case from a wide range of people. The organization is thecolorofchange.org. If you want to be the the 5 millionth person to join up to do that work, you should definitely go to colorofchange.org. Rashad, the work you're doing is phenomenal and so necessary. And we're so glad that we have your voice out there protecting the Black and brown people of this country. So hopefully we'll talk again, and we may be a little further along in this reopening of America, the so-called reopening. Let's hope that it just opens to a new scenario there. Thank you so much for being with us today. And for all of you out there as well, thank you so much for joining us. I'm Carol Jenkins. The program is Black America, and we'll see you the next time.